and welcome this lovely Tuesday morning to Market Insights. I am Lovina Emah. Now, there's something that we as human beings need to function every day, and that is food. But as we know recently, food prices nowadays are expensive, not just in Nigeria, but all over the world. So it is estimated that over 2.3 billion people all over the world are either moderately or severely food insecure. Now, with this statistic, what will happen to us in the future? So what this means is the world needs newer approaches to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 2, which is zero hunger by 2030. Now, I believe that as a team, with everybody working together, we can achieve this. But first of all, we need to face the multitude of challenges that are causing these issues. First up is a growing population. Our population in the world is growing every day. And in addition, there's the climate change issues. Apart from that, there's also resource scarcity. But fear not. Innovation is our weapon. Not just any innovation, but disruptive technologies. Now, we need something really disruptive, something which has never been seen before to actually combat this food crisis that we're about to face. If we don't handle it right now, it will affect us in the future. Now, to start with disruptive technologies, we need to first of all work with vertical farming. Now, that's a good example of disruptive technologies. It's a method of farming that is transforming urban landscapes. Now, this will allow us to grow crops in a controlled environment. And in a state like Lagos, for example, it's working very well because it's a very urban city and you don't have too much wide expanse of land for you to be able to plant food crops in large quantities. But with vertical farming, this can be achieved. In addition, we also need to have data-driven precision agriculture to optimize our yields and minimize waste. However, innovation is not just about technology. It's also about empowering farmers, especially small-scale farmers in developing countries. We need to bridge the knowledge gap. We need to provide them with access to training, financing, and sustainable practices. Now, this isn't just about charity. It's also about being smart in our businesses, in our agricultural business, because securing a food supply chain for everyone will benefit everybody in the long term. So this morning, my guest and I will discuss how to invest in agricultural innovation to build a more resilient and prosperous future for us all. We have a guest in our studio this morning, Dr. Idahosa Osamhanze. He's the Vice President, FemyWalsh Media Limited. Welcome to the program.
Lovina, good morning.
Good to have you on the program. Okay, so we're discussing how to boost agricultural innovation to ensure global food security. And looking at this whole agricultural sector, not just in Nigeria, but all over the world, the United Nations has predicted that there's going to be a global food issue in the next few years, and they're trying to say, okay, we need to actually innovate in our agricultural sector so that by the year 2030, we won't be having this food insecurity again. Now, how can public and private sectors collaborate to fund and develop agricultural innovations?
Yeah, I think those are already happening at global scales. For example, I remember in 2019, a private company from Oman built a vertical farm, which was completely soilless in Sharjah in UAE. And that farm was producing about 16 different fruit items, from cucumber to tomato to carrots and all those roots that, of course, you need soil to have done. And that technology is already in place. They call it the hydroponics agricultural method. That's also already going. Because as the world population increases, and of course, there's a lot of pressure on land holding, and of course, very soon we may not even have lands to farm. So people are already thinking, what are the alternatives to soil? And what do roots actually need in the soil? And of course, science has gotten us to that point that we know what are the nutrients that is required by some certain crops to be able to produce fruits. And so that's already in the market. And you go to UAE, you see good fruits everywhere, but they are produced from vertical farms. So that's happening. You go to Israel, there's also what they call the precision agriculture, where, of course, you can predict the yield of your planting by virtue of technology. So all these are ongoing. Researches are going in the agricultural space, helping people to leverage how to produce more for the teeming population of the world.
Okay, well said. Yes, and we definitely need to achieve this because by 2030, the United Nations, like I mentioned earlier, has predicted that we're going to be facing some food insecurity all over the world. Now,
But I think it's just natural for everybody to understand that because number one, you see, growing up as a child, there are what they call agricultural season. Today, really, those seasons are no longer as predictable as they used to be because rainfall also had changed. The pattern of sun is also changing. And these are all the issues that, of course, the globe has been talking about in terms of climate change. And the more, of course, you see the depletion that happened at the ozone layer, the direct heat that's coming upon the earth, of course, are not friendly to agricultural practice. I remember about 3 or 4 months ago, I was in Morocco and I was speaking to one of our friends there, and he said, "Look, we farmer we are the greatest heat of climate change." And the lady was saying to me that since she was born, she has never seen such a weather in Morocco that's so farmer friendly. So what that suggests is that, of course, if you have situations of climate that are not farm friendly, chances are that, of course, you're not going to get yield. And if there's no yield, there's going to be more hunger in the globe. So people are also sitting down to think and say, how do we remedy this? And I think scientists, of course, people are talking about agri-texture now.
yes, agriculture.
No longer agriculture. So, so using technology to drive agricultural process is what is on board as we speak.
Yes, and innovation is the key to actually bringing about this change. And like I mentioned, disruptive technologies. We know mechanized farming can achieve this, but we need something brand new that hasn't been practiced. And like you mentioned, the soilless farming and also the vertical farming too. Yes, those are very disruptive technologies. Now, I just want to know, still going further on this now, what are the biggest challenges to adopting these new technologies, particularly in developing countries like Nigeria?
Well, I think for us, there's a whole lot of myth around technology, and that's the biggest challenge that most African people will have. I remember a story told by Mesa Otabi in one of his book, and that, he said he loved to eat these we call it fufu here, of course, and that one of the issues that he had was the fact that a young chap developed this pounding machine in Ghana and said, okay, we use it to pound fufu for people to eat. And then a lot of Ghanaian men said they were not going to eat that kind of food because it will not be as sweet as the one that is pounded in the mortar. So these are all issues because people have a lot of superstitions around some basic way of doing things. And that's because change is always very difficult. People are used to a certain way of doing things. It's difficult to see how to drive them from that known route to something else. What that means is that, of course, the regulatory authorities, the government agencies, social rights groups are supposed to assist in terms of educating people, doing a lot of advocacy campaign. And then, of course, also it's also important for us to see that there are no negative side effects from some of these technological innovations, as people have alleged that, of course, when you have genetically modified products and things like this, and then, of course, the chances of them affecting the health situation. So all those myths will need to be debunked by some scientific studies that will give people the kind of the environment or the state of mind to accept and adopt new technology.
So, to further enlighten these people, do you also recommend, for example, educating them in their languages, that this new technology is not to pose some kind of threats to their farming methods, but to help them further, to make it easier for them, perhaps educating them in native languages, or gathering them through their cooperatives to make it easier for them?
Yeah, but I think that's quite important. A lot of people have actually spoken to the mode and pattern of education across Africa, where we use a foreign language to teach people in school. And then, of course, they feel that that's why people are not quite innovative, because the things that you know in your local language are different from when you are explaining it in a secondary language. So I think that is important. But you see, it just because that we have backtrack for too long. I remember growing up as a child in the 1970s. I have parents who were stark illiterates, and they have no idea about even the use of irrigation of fertilizers in farming. But those days, you have people, young men and women, recruited by the Ministry of Agriculture, who were involved in extension services, who were coming to the villages to demonstrate how this technology, especially the fertilizer technology, was used. They came to do soil tests for them to measure the acidity or the alkalinity of the soil, and also to determine what kind of fertilizer was good for the product. But you see, at the point, all these things just give way. So what you have right now is that you just have a universal fertilizer that everybody is using. Nobody check the soil to know the level of alkalinity or the level of acidity before you put the fertilizer in there. And therefore, what you get out of it somehow may have some adverse effect in the body. But I think that the Ministry of Agriculture will need to go back to that same old practice. Now, if you do a survey of the people who work in the Ministry of Agriculture today, you say they are massive, but they sit there in the office doing nothing. And I don't think agriculture can be practiced in the office. So these people should be in the farm, educating rural women, rural men who are involved in agriculture, explaining the technologies that are available, helping them to understand and appreciate their benefits and how it can make work easier for them. And I think that will be very well appreciated, and that also will help in increasing people's participation in agriculture, and help also enhance the food security situation that we're talking about.
Yes, and also enlightening them on this climate change, because like you mentioned when you were talking with your friend in Morocco, and she said, oh, has been the harshest climate.
Oh, yeah, they know.
They know about climate change.
They know climate change. They know that things are not the same.
Okay.
You see, they could predict that this is when rainfall was going to start. I grew up, for example, knowing 11/11, that the day Harmattan starts is on the 11th of November every year. Everybody knew.
Okay.
So that was passed on to us, even by our local parents. I say, so you are looking forward to that 11/11 to see Harmattan start. But now you know that 11/11 you are not seeing any Harmattan, it's still raining. So they already knew that things had changed. Okay. But how to adjust and adapt to these changes are the real information that will be required by the locals.
Yes, and you need to teach them how to survive economically. So now, against this, now we know that what farmers, the crops they harvest, they are packaged, they are taken to the markets to be sold to the final consumer. Now, so what role can businesses play in creating a more sustainable and equitable food system?
Yeah, I think there's a whole lot that we need to do in the agricultural value chain. There's no sufficient investment in the agri-value chain, and I think that is a basic problem. Where you see, for example, you go to my village, they are doing cassava. Now, the only two ways we know to use cassava is either you are using it for the fried gari, or you are using it for the cooked gari, the one they call fufu. So this is the two ways we know. But you see, there are so much in cassava, for example, that is not taken advantage of.
Well, these days, if I'm allowed to say it, some people have been drying it and turning it into powder form that they can use to bake.
That is even the least that you can get from cassava. There's a starch content of cassava that, of course, that this is wasted in the village because nobody is investing in that value chain. You see, we can still eat the cassava as gari or whatever way you want to get it. But there are a lot of 101 things that you can extract from the cassava that will be very meaningful and create a whole lot of economy. But nobody is investing in that value chain. So this is a real problem. So for the farmer, what is looking at is that you're frying gari and you're selling to people who want to make about something to eat. But there's also some industrial aspect of cassava planting that we have to also, that will help create starch, of course, that most of the pharmaceutical industries are using to put their tablets and their caplets together. So all this is required in industrial scale, and we are not taking advantage of that. Take, for example, Nigeria remains the largest producer of cassava globally. So we have that advantage. But to what extent have you been able to exploit that particular sector to mass wealth from it is a different ballgame. So for me, it's how do we reinvent thinking around this line? And I think this is quite also very important. But like we are two superstitious people, so there are basic things and belief that we have that we feel cannot change. But I think this is the role education plays really. The School of Agriculture continue to think of new ways to farm, to make it easy and attractive to a younger generation of people.
Yes, definitely. There's a lot of work for them to do in that sector. Okay, so now looking ahead, looking into the future now. So what do you think are the most, like, we know introducing tractors, holds more mechanized farming methods is to aid farmers on their farms. But what other game-changing innovations do you think has the potential to revolutionize agriculture, not just in Nigeria, globally also?
There are very terrible technologies that are coming on board that are quite disruptive and innovative. People are thinking of actually producing meat now from the laboratory without having to kill a cow. Yes. So all these technologies are already here, and people are thinking and they are working very hard because it's like preparing for the rainy day. Because we know that a certain time will come as the population of the world increases. And of course, we know that, like they say in the elementary economies, the factor of land in production cannot increase. It's a fixed factor. Then, of course, certainly, when you have too many people who are staying in the land that you have, it will be very difficult for us to be able to feed ourselves when we get beyond the 8 billion mark that we are in now. So these are issues that must be addressed, and then we must look for creative ways, innovative ways to do new things. And say the world is already there. It's only that most of the African countries are being left behind at the moment because we are really not thinking about these things. Because the synthetic, what they call it, the synthetic technology has always been there over time, and people have deployed it in producing rubber, in producing cocoa, yes, for chocolate and the rest of it. And so those technology can only but improve, and then check new ways to create tomatoes without planting the seed. So all those things will come to pass.
Okay, yes, and I hope we would also welcome them happily when they do happen.
Yeah, but of course, when you have alternative, then of course you may not welcome it. But there are certain things that, of course, we cannot run away from. But once you get to that threshold, you may not be able to run too far because it's either you adopt or die. So, like they say, innovate or die. If you are not innovating, you are dying. If you are not embracing innovation, you're dying, and that is what it is. You remember those early days in the early 90s when computer came in newly. People who were used to typewriter felt that it was something that was not going to last for too long. But of course, you know the story now. They're all out of market. The only way you see typewriter now is in the High Court where people are typing affidavit. So these are the things that we see, and technology will come to stay, and we can't change that.
Okay.
And it's even better for us because we are dealing now with a generation that were born in internet.
Yes, yes.
And so that internet generation is what we are dealing with right now. And these people are savvy when it comes to technology, and they will try anything out. So as the older generations are giving way, definitely the newer generation will embrace change, and then they will run with it.
So we're looking at a future where, because as you know, right now in this part of the world, this our country, Nigeria, we're looking at a situation whereby we don't have too many young people who are farmers. It's mostly, if we go back home to our local communities, the rural areas, we have elderly people, but it's not something they can be doing in the long term. We need more young people there. So we're looking at a situation where we see younger people using these technologies in farming and also using what they make in their labs to aid them to make farming easier. So we're looking at a more technological future.
Yeah, but I think in terms of agric adoption, especially for the younger generation, the problem has actually been the issue of incentive. I remember a very funny video, but profound video of a young lady, a medical doctor in Uganda, who at a United Nations Conference on Agriculture, Food and Agriculture Organization conference in Uganda, was saying that she made very profound statement, two profound statements. The first was the fact that the world, especially with regards to Africa, we emphasize so much about health, but where are the real problem that Africa faces is hunger. And so she said, as a doctor, anywhere she go, people like to call her medical doctor, medical doctor. But having practiced medicine for some time, she discovered that many of the patients that she encountered from day to day are actually suffering from dietary related issues. So he feels that agric should actually be the queen in Africa, not emphasis on health. Because the first thing is to feed people well, and when people eat well, they become really healthy. And of course, emphasis is not on that. We're talking about medication, where we should actually be talking about qualitative feeding. Now, the second point she made was the fact that the way agriculture is also advertised in Africa is also not encouraging young people to adopt it. In that, when you see agriculture, it does not look sexy. If you want to put a woman in agriculture, is one old woman, wretched woman, and that's what you put at the back of the brochure. And that day, he actually had a brochure having an old woman, East African woman, with a child in the farm. And he said, there's no way a 21st century child will want to become like this old woman.
Yes.
And she was advocating and said, use my picture and put it. Let every young man who sees my face advertised in agriculture be chasing me, and they will chase me to the farm. You know, it was very profound, because sometimes we do some things without really necessarily looking at, what message we are passing out. And then the final word she mentioned was the fact of funding, access to capital. And he says, of course, we are also not competitive because we don't have access to capital because of the very high interest rate. And so he was comparing Uganda with Japan, that if a lady in Japan is doing farm and is getting a facility for 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%, now she in Uganda, she's getting the loan for 40%. That's suicide. So she can't compete. So these are the issues that, of course, that needs to be addressed to see how young people can fall in love with agriculture and then, of course, embrace it, we'll say. Because this whole cutlass form of agriculture, like Sunday Adelaja would say, ended in Europe in the 15th century. And so we cannot continue to use it in Africa and expect that we'll be able to create the kind of food security that we envisage.
Okay, but I'll just still going further on this. What other steps would you recommend to make farming more attractive to the next generation?
Yeah, but I don't think it's more than the few things that we have highlighted. The first is to let people understand that, look, it is not just about whole and cutlass, that we can actually take it as a business where, of course, you can recruit people. And then, of course, in terms of participation, we also need to invest in basic equipment. There are things that people use to plant seed now, corn seed, that you can plant a whole acre with one person driving the tractor around. And that will take one woman or one man about a month or two to do what a tractor will do in one day. So once you have those technologies around, people, of course, will want to do it. But because the real agriculture, whole and cutlass agriculture, is really tasking, we need to have government has plenty of tractors that need also to see how they can be harnessed, like car hailing services, where, for example, I have a farm and I need a tractor to do clearing, I can book, like I'm booking a taxi on any of the app.
Like an agricultural app.
Okay, yes, of course. Well, of course, you can have access to tractors to do your farm, and then, of course, you pay the token. Now, once these services are available, I think that a lot of people will want to come into that sector.
Well said, Doctor. Now, before we round up the program now, our current food distribution system in Nigeria, do you think it is hindering our food security efforts? And if that is so, now, what kind of innovation do we need to address this issue?
I think it's also to see, we talked earlier on collaborations with private sector,
Yes.
really having to invest in that sector. There's nothing that really saddens one's heart than the level of waste we see during harvest season in Africa. And this is because storage facilities are not available. And we don't have cold storage facilities where we could actually take some fresh product and preserve it throughout off-season cycles. That's not available. And I think, for example, recently, a particular agency in the UAE had to invest in cold storage facility in India. And that's private. What they do is that when you have fresh tomatoes, they take it from the farm and they preserve it. And then, of course, you can actually stabilize the price across through the year. So that's happening. Now, we don't have silos, for example, where we can also, the government can also, through the agricultural board, for example, take grains from farmers at a stabilized and standard pricing, and then we store it. So we need to have grain reserves. Just as people are having petrol reserve, we must have grain reserve so that in case we get to that point where it is difficult, absolutely difficult to get food. That story was told in the Christian scripture when the Pharaoh of Egypt had a dream, and the 7 lean year and the 7 fat years. And how did they deal with the 7 fat year? And I think that that is as relevant today as yesterday, that you need to build storages where you can store excess of what we harvest in during harvest season. And then, of course, when the rainy day come, we can rely on those storages. So for me, that is what it is. There's so much waste, except you've not been to places like My 12 or K2 where you see fruit sold. You go and see the level of waste is heartbreaking.
Yes, but in Nigeria, we have our grain reserves, our rice grain reserves, because back in, like a few months ago, back in January, when we're having people not being able to get grains like rice, and the president appealed to the rice storage association to release grains from their reserves. So we have grains, we have silos for grains, but it's mostly in the northern parts of the country. So maybe perhaps it could go around our 36 states, because I remember also a few weeks back when the Lagos State governor also said we needed to have silos in Lagos State to actually store up our food reserves. So it's something that I think...
Yeah, but I think they are not enough in terms of quantity. You are looking at it.
Yes,
I know
we have a growing population.
We have one located in Edo State, really.
Yes.
But you see, how often is this used is a problem also. Because the real truth of the matter is that there's also no deliberate policy on the part of government to say how to get grains into this reserve. And that is a real problem. And I don't think we have enough reserve for food. Because if you shut down the world, for example, in 2 weeks, what is in our reserve cannot feed us for 1 day. So we can't call that really. So there's a need for more investment so that we can put these things where the farms are.
Put them where the farms are.
But you won't be able to do that except you have people who are playing that value chain, like the marketing board, who will be able to buy off some of all this grain and store on behalf of government. That is important and that's critical. So you have the National Grain Reserve. And then, of course, you also have individual playing in that sector to take this thing from the farmer. And then, of course, you know the farmer like to want money quickly. So they don't want something that you are going to store for too long because their livelihood depends on what they are able to sell. So if you don't do this, you can't expect them to create their own reserve, but they will want to have you buy from them and then keep. So I think that's the way it should really be.
Thank you so much, Dr. Idahosa, for joining us this morning on Market Insights as we discuss boosting agricultural innovation with the use of technologies. It's been great having you on the program, and we look forward to having you again on Market Insights.
I'm looking forward to seeing humanoids, robots in our farm, planting and doing amazing things, and then take pressure away from the humans.
That would be a beautiful sight to see because I'm all about technology, so I totally love that. Okay, let's take a look at our money market figures this morning, how the dollars, the nairas, and the pound sterling is faring this morning on from the Central Bank of Nigeria rate and also the parallel market rate. So we're going to look at the dollars, pound sterling, and euro. So at the CBN rate, the selling rate to be emphatic. Now, Central Bank of Nigeria rate is 1,520 naira to $1. At the parallel market rate, it's it's 1,339 naira at the Central Bank of Nigeria rate, and the parallel market rate is 1,520 naira to $1. Now, the pound sterling at the Central Bank of Nigeria, it is 1,731 naira to £1 sterling, and at the parallel market is 1,920 naira to £1 sterling. The euro, and in the euro it's 1,476 naira. That's the Central Bank of Nigeria rate to €1, and at the parallel market is 1,600 naira to €1. So those are our money market figures this morning. It's been a pleasure having my guest on this program to also recommend ways by which we could boost agriculture, not just in Nigeria, but also all over the world, so we could cope with our growing population and we can feed our population in the future. Many thanks for watching the program. Do stay tuned to news updates on Souk News Television. I am Lovina Emah.